The following is a presentation of Surprise Church. El siguiente programa es la presentación de la iglesia Surprise.
In the middle of a series called The Comeback, because there are so many times in our lives where we think the score is settled, where we think that hope is lost, where we think about the future in a way that is maybe seems as bleak as the present, but we don't always factor in the God equation. We don't always factor God into the equation. And the Bible is chock full of stories of people who had no hope that God gives hope to, that they were a situation in which they were totally against the odds, but because odds are terrible, God steps in and totally changes the equation. And I fundamentally believe that life is hard, that the challenges are real, and that all of us are fighting battles in our lives. And so we all need comebacks. And you might be riding high at a season of your life where it's just a really smooth season, and thank God for that, but don't expect it to last forever because that's not life. Expectations need to be in line with reality, and you might at the very least know someone in your life who is facing what feels like a hopeless situation or a challenge in front of you that you're not sure you can stay on course. And this series is meant to reframe how we look at those challenges. If I were to take my glasses off, I would not see how good looking you guys are. I would see a bunch of blurry forms. I can't tell how good looking you are. But I can tell you're here. I can tell there's shapes and there's people, and the room is generally full, and that's awesome. Sometimes we need to be around people who can see what we can't, to teach us how to see. That's why people like being around people with a good sense of humor, right? Because they can see the same event and see a side of it that makes everybody happy, that makes us laugh, that shows us the irony or the silliness or the playfulness or the joy in the underside of even a problem or a burden. People like to be around those who can help them see something in a positive, happy, funny way. When I was in my early 30s, I was feeling old. And I was sitting around. If you're feeling old and you're not old, you just sit around old people and they'll make you feel better. And I was sitting around an 80-year-old guy named Pete. And Pete was listening to me complain, and he's just shaking his head. And he had a tin of chew, and he had like half of it in his lip, and he spits into his bottle and listens to me. He's like, "How old are you?" I said, 34. 34? I got socks older than you. I just felt better instantly talking to Pete. I went through a breakup when I was a kid, and I was just feeling sorry for myself and feeling sad and feeling like life is over or whatever. My dad comes up and sits down on my bedside and listens to me talk, and just like, "Man, you just got to get back on the saddle and ride." I'm like, "Dad, that's a terrible metaphor to use in dating." But at the same time, I'm listening to him, and I'm hearing a man that knows and loves me speak hope into my life about a future that isn't as bleak as I think it is. And we need to be around people who help us see life differently when we can't. The Bible is written to also do that, to help us see life differently, because faith looks at the same things differently. Gosh, you guys look good. It helps us see problems and pain. It helps us see bad odds against the backdrop of an all-powerful God, against the vision and will that he has for our lives. And that's when we might make different decisions that we would if we were not looking through that faith lens. We're going to take a look at a couple stories today that have to do with giants. The Bible uses giants, I think, as a powerful symbol of insurmountable odds that we all face in our life. And then it shows one story is how not to handle that, and the other story is the opposite of how to handle them. The first one comes in the book of Numbers. First couple books of the Bible are the story of God's chosen people, the nation of Israel, that God chose one nation in order to eventually, through Jesus, who came from that nation, bless the entire world. And that nation is now going towards Israel after being rescued from slavery in Egypt, the whole Pharaoh story. And then they are wandering in the desert wilderness of Sinai, heading towards Israel. And when they get to the banks of the promised land, they send in, of the 12 tribes of Israel, they send in one representative of all 12 tribes to explore and spy out the land, so that when they have to take it militarily, they will know where and how to do so. So these spies are going and examining and exploring the land to come back and give a report of how they are going to live into God's promised land. It's not if, it's just to go figure out how we're going to do it. Well, here's what happens when they go and look at this land. They gave Moses this account. We went into the land to which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey. Here is its fruit, and they show two guys carrying a pole with a massive grape cluster on it. It's like, this land is fruitful. But the people who live there are powerful. And the cities are fortified and very large. So think of large, tall walls. Maybe they didn't even actually see the people. They just saw the big cities they built and assumed that they were giants. We don't know. We even saw the descendants of Anak there. That's a mythical giant race of human beings. Then Caleb, so not everybody has this bleak view. Caleb silenced the people before Moses and said, we should go up and take possession of the land. We can certainly do it. Look at the two different perspectives on the exact same thing. One is absolutely hopeless, and one is completely hopeful. Let me ask you this, and just on your own, in your own mind, how much do you trust your perspective? How much do you trust your perspective on your problems? How much do you trust your perspective on a relationship or a difficulty at work or school that isn't working? How much do you trust your perspective when you feel hopeless about something? Do you just give in to your perspective? Do you give in to your pessimism? Do you turn inward and just see yourself as inadequate and lash out or hide or numb your pain? Or somehow do you trust your perspective so much that you act on it in a way that is totally certain that God can't step in? Or do you do something else? Caleb wanted to go a totally 180-degree different direction because they had a different perspective on the same thing. The other 10 spies, Joshua and Caleb thought that way. The other 10 spies wanted to go the opposite direction because they had a very opposite perspective on the same thing. Goes on. But the men who had gone up with him said, we can't attack the people. They are stronger than we are. And they spread among the Israelites a bad report about the land that they had explored. Are you believing and buying into a bad report about your life, about your body image, about your identity, about the best case scenario for you as a human being to maybe get some good things done before you die or have some fun before you die? Have you bought a bad report about a family member? Have you bought a bad report about a problem that you just don't know how to solve and it's going to eat you alive? Have you bought a bad report about your ability to follow and serve and trust God through pain? Have you bought a bad report? Have you settled for a lesser story than the gospel story for your life? Are you living according to a bad report? Have you settled for less than you would settle if you knew God was real and if he knew he was going to be there for you? They said, the land we explored devours those living in it. All the people we saw there are of great size. Listen to the exaggeration. We saw the Nephilim there. The descendants of Anak come from the Nephilim. Again, this mythic race of giants that were half angel, half human. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, gives a clue into their self-understanding, and we look the same to them. They assume everybody else sees them as they see themselves. If you see yourself as unworthy of love, you're going to assume everyone else sees you as unworthy of love. If you see yourself unworthy of respect, you're going to assume everyone else sees you as unworthy of respect. And the only way to change that is to change you. And to remember that you are worthy. You are enough. You are enough. God has created you, and he looks at you and says, my son died to make you enough. You're enough. You have enough. You are enough. Stop scrambling and struggling to measure up. You're enough. You're not a grasshopper. You're a child of the King. See, giants, let me tell you something about giants. Giants are real, and they're imagined at the same time. Problems in your life, they're not just problems because you made it up. They're not just imagined, but they become so large that they become mythic in nature. They become so giant that they're insurmountable because they're both real problems and problems that we create at the same time. I don't think there's anybody in here that's not thinking of an area that they need to come back where they're totally imagining a problem that's not there. I don't think that's the case. I think the problem is, if our problem is this big, we make it far, far bigger. And if our God is this big, we almost act as if he doesn't exist. Giants are real and giants are imagined. Listen to how the 10 faithless spies convinced the whole crowd of Israel to take their faithless perspective. If only we had died in Egypt, where they were brutally treated as slaves, or in this wilderness. I underline that because God is eventually, at the end of this conversation, going to say, you're going to get to have your own way. Have it your own way. Oftentimes, God steps back and says, okay, if that's what you want, try it. You want to die in the wilderness? Okay. They ask, why is the Lord bringing us to this land only to let us fall by the sword? Our children will be taken as plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt? And they said to each other, we should choose a leader and go back to Egypt. They just want to totally rebel. And so Joshua and Caleb said, do not rebel against the Lord, and do not be afraid of the land, because we, different lens, we will devour them. Their protection is gone. The Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of them. They were able to factor God into the equation and totally change the way they look at the same thing, because God is a part of the equation. But this is how protective we can be with our insecurities. If someone challenges our insecurities, that challenges us to look at how we are wrongly and faithlessly processing our own reality. That's risky. We have to confess and repent of a godless, faithless perspective on the same problem to have a different perspective. We have to say, actually, I'm wrong. I got to stop thinking that way. And most people don't want to be told they're wrong. And so it says, but the whole assembly talked about stoning him. And this is not the 60s peace, love, and dope version of stoning. This is execution stoning. They wanted to kill them if they wouldn't shut up, spreading this poisonous thing called hope. See, the crowd prefers to kill the courageous and die in the wilderness. You might find yourself really struggling at work to be a positive, optimistic, faithful presence. It might just feel like you're being pulled down by people who want everybody else to see life the same pessimistic way. Because if we can just get everybody to agree with us on how bad everything is, then we're going to feel better about the lack of hope we choose to see. Does that sound familiar? Sometimes we just want to pull everybody down with us into our pity pit so that we feel better about not climbing out ourselves. And they say, if you don't stop this, we're going to kill you. See, crowds don't breed giant killers. Crowds don't do it. Crowds suck giant killers back down to being giant fearers. The crowd focused on the giant problem. Joshua and Caleb, they were totally distracted. They couldn't even think about the giants. They didn't even talk about the giants because they were focused on what a giant God can do. Are you focused on a giant problem in your life, or are you focused on what a giant God can do? Where's your heart and your attitude? I'm confessing to you today that I tend to see the problem, and I need somebody to punch me in the face and say, what are you doing? Look at the giant God over and above and around the problem and the giant God that lives in you. I need people in my life to remind me of that, or all I see is a giant problem. And I want to kill people symbolically who tell me otherwise. So I need to listen to the voices that are going to point me back to a giant God. Well, like I said, God gives them what they want. He said, for every day you spent spying out the land that I promised to give to you, and you failed to believe that I was going to give you that land, I'm going to give you 1 year of wandering in the wilderness. So you spent 40 days wandering in the land I gave you. Now you're going to spend 40 years wandering in the wilderness until every one of you, ages 20 and up, is dead. I'm going to take your children into the land instead of you. I'm going to give you what you want. Because faith sees giants differently. Faith looks at the hurdles, the obstacles, the burdens, the pain, the problem, the guilt that we all have to deal with. Faith looks at them differently. Do not trust your own perspective to the point where you have to adopt a fatalistic or destructive or distracted or self-medicating approach to dealing with a problem. It doesn't have to go the way that you feel it's going, because when God is a part of the equation, he promises that your best days are ahead of you. He just promises that. He promises no giant is too big. No heart is too hard. Faith, just remind yourself, even if you can't see the perspective right now, that's okay. But just knowing that it's there is a win. Like knowing, like I'm so under the weight of my depression right now. I cannot see any hope or any light, but I have been told and I believe that there is light. And so I'm going to operate as if it's true. I'm going to get help because it's true. I'm going to get resources and medication or treatment or help or friends. I'm going to operate as if there is light even though I can't see it. That's story one. 40 days leads to failure to believe that God is bigger than the giant. Story two, a story you've heard probably even more frequently than story one, David and Goliath. Another 40 days and another giant. 40 days tends to be the biblical time period for testing and trial. And so almost like God is giving his people another chance. Another army sent to take another bad guy army, and there's another giant in that army. For 40 days, the Philistine Goliath, the giant, came forward every morning and evening and took his stand. So twice a day for 40 straight days, this giant stands on one side of the valley of the Philistine army and calls out to God's people of Israel and causes their shoulders to quake in their boots, saying, "Send one of your men to fight me. And if he wins, we will all be your slaves. And if I win, you will all be our slaves." And he hurled insults at them and mocked them, and they had no answer. This is the picture of shame. This is the picture of fear. Daily, this man came out in the morning and in the evening. Their day was bookended by the mockery of a giant who just wanted them to go to bed knowing that they were going to get it all over again the next day, that they are not worthy, that they don't measure up. I don't know the voice that you're hearing every morning and every night, but if it's a voice that reminds you that you don't measure up, that you're not worthy, that you better work harder, that you better try harder, that you better look better, that you better be smarter, or at least try to look that way to everybody else, you're hearing the same voice. And the voice is lying to you. But it's powerful, especially if you don't hear another one. And for 39 straight days, the giant comes out and does his daily mocking. The soldiers hear him and run away and quake in their boots. But then day 40 came. Something else happened. Check this out. David, who is too young to be in the army, he's too puny to even be noticed. He comes probably wearing pants that are too baggy and big for him, hand-me-downs from his older brothers that are fighting in the army, or should be fighting but aren't. And he's carrying a loaves of bread and cheese and snacks from his dad on the farm. He runs to the battle lines to give his brothers food and check in on them, see how they're doing for his dad. David ran to the battle lines and asked his brothers how they were. And as he was talking with them, Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath, stepped out of his lines and shouted his usual defiance. For 39 days, Goliath has shouted his usual defiance. Today, on day 40, David is there to hear him. And David has a different lens. Buckle up. This is going to be a totally different response to the same thing. It is possible for you and I to see the same thing totally different. And David heard it. Now it says, whenever the Israelites saw the man, they all fled from him. in great fear. So the guy comes every time, they pee their togas, they run away. David stands there and it's like, where's everybody going? You see, faith sees giants differently. David's like, what is wrong with these guys? You're soldiers in the army of the Lord promised. He has actually promised that we are going to win this battle. It's a matter of fact. I believe that this God's promises never fail. So what are you afraid of? David, here's his perspective. Watch this. This is one of the coolest verses in the Bible. Here's where David's mind is at. David asked the men standing near him, what will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? He wants to know what he's going to get after he kills him. Well, are we talking money? Maybe a yacht? What are we going to serve at the victory party? I like bologna. I like Texas sheet cake. Are there going to be dancers? What kind of music are we talking? Are we talking country? Are we talking retro? Are we talking like village people? I just want to know what kind of speakers and who's DJing the dance. I just want to know so that after I kill him, I know what we're going to do. It would be fun to know right now because I'm really excited about the victory party. And everybody looks around or looks down at this runt, and they think he's crazy. They don't try to kill him like they did, but they laugh him off and think he's insane. But at the same time, they have no other options. No one else in this entire army has even thought like that. No one else has even considered the possibility that there could be a victory party to plan. No one has even considered the chicken line that they're going to do at the victory dance after they do the Macarena and then do the what's that thing, the limbo? They haven't even considered the fact that there is a party coming. See, here's the deal. This is what faith is. Faith is remembering the God above the giant. Good one to snap a picture of and share, by the way. Faith is remembering the God above the giant and anticipating the victory party after the giant. Faith looks back and looks forward. Psalm 40. It's a man who is struggling with the present, and so he remembers the past in which God remembered him once and lifted him up out of a miry pit and put his feet on a rock. And he says, therefore, in the future, many are going to see and fear and put their trust in you based on how you deliver me now, even though the now it seems uncertain. Faith looks back and remembers that God is here with, above, and beyond the giant, and looks forward to the victory party. Doesn't mean that he's going to always take the cancer away. Doesn't mean that he's always going to take the debt away. Doesn't mean he's always going to take the disease or the problem or the burden away. It doesn't mean that he'll always save the relationship, but it does mean that there will be joy afterward because of how he walks us through. Again, same graph, same chart. Crowds don't breed giant killers. If David simply hopes that by standing around the right people, he will absorb the right perspective, he would have been badly mistaken because they all have the fear-based human perspective. They're all looking through the broken glasses. They're focused on the giant problem. David is focused on what a giant God can do. And so you know the story. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you. It's a longer, extended narrative where he tries on armor. It doesn't fit. It's too heavy. He's too little. And so he just decides to go without it. He decides to not even get a sword or a harpoon or a spear. He doesn't bring some kind of crossbow or he doesn't bring anything except for just a few small stones. He doesn't really have a fancy modern slingshot. Think of a bandana that you put a stone in and just wind it around. This is why, by the way, white guys like me dance like this at weddings. This is the celebration of David's victory, right? And so he goes down to fight the giant. He does the white guy wedding dance. He spins the stone in the bandana. He lets it go, and his aim is uncanny. Guided by God, it hits the giant right in the temple, and it sinks in. So it goes in that soft spot, right into his frontal lobe, crushes his brain, dead. And everybody stands there in absolute shock. Everybody except David, who knew it would happen. Because God promised victory. David was already thinking of the victory party, but you know what else David was already planning to do? He was planning to cut the giant's head off. But he didn't bring a sword. And so he planned to cut the giant's head off with the giant's own sword. He's got this whole thing planned out. This little puny runt pipsqueak, was planning the Macarena dance with shrimp caviar leftovers from the next day he'd be having leftovers from the victory party over and over again. And he was also planning, after God defeated the giant, to pull the giant's oversized sword out of his sheath and cut his head off. Why? Look, it's not to kill him. Look at this. David took hold of the Philistine's sword and drew it from the sheath after he killed him, which means the giant was already dead. He cut off his head with the sword. Why? Why cut the dude's head off? He's dead. He cut his head off because crowds become believers when they see decapitated giants. I know this isn't a sanitized Western children's story. I know that. That's why we send the kids out there. He carries this giant head. The giant was 9.5 feet tall, and now he's this tall. And he carries this bloody head back to the fearful soldiers and said, "And you are afraid of this giant. Not so tall anymore, is he?" This is what God can do when you actually believe in him. They took that head and they displayed it for a while. I know it's morbid. I know it's not sanitized, but they just needed a reminder, because this problem isn't always about this problem. It's about the next giant that we're going to see. And if we don't remember how God defeated the last giant, we're not going to expect him to defeat this giant or the future giant. And so they cut his head off to remember it next time. I talked to a woman yesterday who says, I have really good days with depression and anxiety, and I have really bad days. And on the good days, I buy myself flowers, so that on the bad days, I see him. And I remember there's good days coming. That's a little bit better than the giant's head, maybe. What are you going to cut off after you beat this giant? What are you going to take to remember the next time the giant comes your way? I know one man who said, I'm going to take the change that I got the last time I bought drugs. I'm going to frame it like the first dollar your business makes. So the next time I'm facing the temptation to make money the easy way, I'm going to say, no, I cut its head off. Maybe you need to just take a picture of a good moment in your family or your marriage or your job and just have it in your wallet the next time it gets bad, because you remember, I cut this one off because I want to remember this. I don't want to forget that I have a giant God who lifts us up when we're down, who carries us through pain, who makes impossible odds possible, because odds are terrible gods. Crowds become believers when they see decapitated giants. And so I want to challenge you to cut its head off after you win. I want you to imagine the victory party after this win. I want you to think and look straight in the eyes of the giant that's standing across the valley, taunting you every morning and every night. I want you to stare at that giant across as everybody else might be running away, as you might be shaking your boots, thinking there's no hope. And I want you to walk into that valley with whatever you have in your hand. And David, all he had is a couple small stones. And I want you to trust that you are enough. God is enough. And so you are enough. You don't have to run. You don't have to hide. You don't need distractions. You don't need to numb the pain. Stand up to the giant and plan the party afterward, and then afterward, cut his head off and show it to the world. Take something away from the victory that is going to encourage you and someone else next time. And sometimes these giants, as I invite the band back up, sometimes these giants, they need their head cut off before they're dead. Sometimes you just have to stop going to the liquor store. Sometimes you just have to stop hanging out with these friends or this person because it's bad for your work, or it's bad for your school, or it's bad for your family. Sometimes you have to just cut it off at the knees to make sure that this situation doesn't infect every other part of your life. Sometimes you got to cut it off before it gets you. But certainly you need to do so after, in order to remind yourself next time about what God did. Would you stand and claim this as we pray today? Heavenly Father, fear is so powerful that it cripples even the greatest of faith. God, do not let us live in fear. Let us live hopeless lives where we simply calculate the odds on a human level and assume that you are not involved and that you can't do everything. Just like your prophet Ezekiel, as he stood on top of that valley of dry bones in the vision you gave him, and you told him to speak life into those dry bones, and all of a sudden those dry bones started weaving together into bodies that stood up and became a mighty army. Speak life into these dry bones in this room so that we can leave this place a mighty army that makes peace through love, through faith, through courage in our homes, businesses, workplaces, schools, and families. This future plays out two different ways. One way, we walk out terrified and confident only in failure because we are not worthy. And we are going to scurry and scratch and claw to try to prove ourselves worthy while running from giants that we're unworthy to face. The other future looks like Jesus standing before a giant cross saying, Christ alone is worthy, and then dying and rising to walk us through life and fight our battles for us. God, let that be our future in Jesus' name. Let's sing.